Welcome to part 2 of my interview with Professor Robert Temple, who's a researcher of ancient civilization and prolific writer on the topic. He presents an overarching view that human civilization is actually much older than it's currently believed, and it's a popular idea nowadays. This topic has gained quite a lot of ground in recent years, but Professor Temple stands out as he has been one advocating for a much deeper exploration by academia for almost 50 years. So he's the guy to talk to as far as I'm concerned. The implications of this research that many have done regarding the ancient megalithic structures as having been built with the aid of ancient astronauts from other worlds seemed so far-fetched when his first book, The Serious Mystery, was first introduced. The reason being that mainstream academia, mainstream science, and policymakers would simply discredit the idea based on quote-unquote lack of evidence that such beings even exist. The standard narrative being that human beings are alone in the universe, which is incredibly vast, as we all know, and that the presence of these monoliths is not evidence at all of their existence. That the megaliths were nothing more than a religious expression, or perhaps a public works program, or perhaps tombs, or perhaps calendars. Nobody really knows why they were built. All we know is that they were built with an impressive precision, even though the technology of the time was incredibly low tech. Professor Temple shed some light on these ideas as my interview with him continues today. We will also get a real lesson in what the ancients knew about consciousness as it existed outside of the human brain. His latest book, A New Science of Heaven, is a very interesting read, and I highly recommend it to anyone interested in the subject. So without further delay, here's part 2 of my interview with Professor Robert Temple. Well, what are your thoughts about the ancient astronaut theory?
Well, I absolutely don't dismiss it. The people say that I insist upon it, but that's not true. I suggest it's a very strong possibility because, and it doesn't seem to me inconceivable or strange in any way. You know, we live in a big universe. We know very little about it,
Right.
and tend to not even something really way out. I don't believe in dismissing things. I always leave the door open to possibility because I'm well aware of how fallible we all are. And I've known far too many renegade scientists who were proved correct after decades of abuse.
Amen.
And I've also read that famous book about paradigm shifts. And so we know how difficult it is to get people out of their mental ruts. You come up with new evidence. These days, it's getting worse.
Amen.
Because everybody believes they are right. It doesn't matter what kind of nonsense they believe, because they believe it. It's what they call their truth. It cannot be challenged. And so you can't reason with anybody who's in that frame of mind. You can't have a conversation. You can't talk to them like you and I are talking now.
Right.
I mean, you might say to me that you think that all babies are green when they're born, and they only become different colors when they're 2 years old. Now, that sounds crazy, doesn't it?
Oh, it's a theory that I'm actually working on. I'm teasing. Go ahead, please.
I knew it, Mark. I knew that somehow.
Yeah, just a little light humor to create a segue here. I'd like to get a little more deeply into what you know about the esoteric wisdom of the ancient Egyptians. I'm interested in your ideas about what the ancient Egyptians were able to contribute in terms of esoteric knowledge that was encapsulated or shrouded by the outer wisdom presented in the religions that we have available to us now. What are your thoughts about that in terms of wisdom and the truth of what these religions and expressions have been trying to teach us about our true nature?
Well, for millennia, there have been degrees of initiation into the mysteries and the secrets.
Mm-hmm.
And the justification for that is, and I used to disagree with it, but I'm coming around to think maybe they knew what they were talking about after all, that ordinary people, whatever that means, and I don't wish to insult anybody by calling them ordinary. The ordinary people, as they were considered, couldn't grasp the higher and more sophisticated forms of the knowledge. And they would be initiated into what were called the lesser mysteries or the outer mysteries.
Right.
And of course, this system has been carried over into Freemasonry.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same kind of system. And but with the ancient mysteries, and I've studied a lot about them, and this included early Christianity, by the way,
Mm-hmm.
they had the different degrees of initiation, and you learned more and more as the people teaching you, that is the wise priests or whoever, thought you were up to it.
Right.
And
I mean, even Saul of Tarsus, I'm paraphrasing, said, I'm going to feed milk to the general population and keep meat for the initiated.
yes, well, he was certainly somebody in that category of stratified initiation,
Right.
which was definitely the case with the immediate circle of Jesus. For instance, Jesus, and of course Paul stroke Saul didn't know Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
The immediate circle around Jesus, you had the man who's come to be known as Saint Peter, who was very far from being an intellectual. He was more of a bodyguard type or a bouncer.
He was a fisherman.
I see it like this. Let's, at the risk of diverting again, this whole Jesus thing, Jesus was trying to preach his version of Judaism in the town of his mother, which was Capernaum in Latin, now in Hebrew and Aramaic, on the shore of the Sea of Galilee.
Mm-hmm.
And he was thrown out of the synagogue because they said he was a heretic, and this was not to be tolerated, because you know how intolerant very Orthodox Jews can be,
Right.
to the Jews who are less Orthodox than they are.
Mm-hmm.
You see all this. There's a great stratification in Judaism. There's many different kinds of Judaism. Most people don't realize. Anyway, so what did Jesus do? I think it's very obvious. He said, well, look, if I can't preach to all the fancy pants that are sitting in the synagogue, which is where all the well-to-do Jews congregate,
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to go down to the docks and preach to the fishermen, because I don't look down upon them. I'm not interested in sitting with Mr. and Mrs. Rich Man,
Right.
in the synagogue for social purposes, to be seen to be a leader of the community. That's all nonsense to me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm quite happy to go and preach to somebody who might listen to me, and I'll go preach to the fishermen. So he went down to the boats,
Mm-hmm.
and he started preaching to the fishermen. I think that's true. They really were fishermen, just as you said. Peter was one of them, and Andrew, another, and so on. We don't know their real names. And so I would say that the fishermen couldn't believe it, that
Right.
a genuine rabbi, because he was a rabbi, was coming down and bothering with them, because they were the scum of the earth. The rich Jews wouldn't even speak to them. They were, just like hired help. So Jesus did not have such social airs and graces. He went and he befriended the fishermen. They saw that he really cared about them. That as far as he was concerned, they were people.
Mm-hmm.
And they were entitled to just as much respect as Mr. and Mrs. Richman sitting in the synagogue, who were heads of the community, pillars of the community, which meant nothing to him,
Mm-hmm.
which is quite correct. And so the fishermen fell in love with Jesus.
Right.
Because here was this brilliant man, a real rabbi as well, talking about their religion, which they sort of knew something about, but they didn't really because they were only fishermen and weren't allowed in the synagogue. And they didn't have any decent clothes anyway, and they smelt of fish. That did not bother Jesus. So this is where his core following came from. They'd give their lives for him, or at least they thought they would, until the last thing came to it at the end. But the fact is that they were essentially his bodyguards,
mm-hmm.
because they could handle crowds, keep them from crushing their man, who was small. The thing is that the Jewish writings about Jesus are very prolific, but rarely read, because the Jews don't want to read about Jesus because they call him the troublemaker,
mm-hmm.
which he was from their point of view, because he was trying to reform their religion, wasn't he? He was a troublemaker just as Luther was to the Pope.
Right.
And so, but the Christians don't read them because they say, oh, it's only Jewish stuff. And so it's sitting in the middle. So I've read a lot of this. And there are descriptions of Jesus passed down through the rabbis and written down, in which they describe him as being small and ugly.
Really?
And his body was covered with sacred tattoos all over.
I was unaware of that.
Yes. But they said that despite the fact that he had an ugly face, there was the most astonishing radiance of personality that came out of him. And that he was so radiant as a person
mm-hmm.
that you didn't even notice that he was ugly.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, this was part of what it was all about. Being ugly didn't matter.
Right.
He was beautiful within. And you see, the rabbis actually committed this to writing, this information.
Mm-hmm.
They were actually giving an accurate description of him.
Mm-hmm.
In my opinion, these pictures of the imaginary Jesus that you see framed and hanging up in convents, that's a load of nonsense. He didn't look like that sort of dreamy, pious face. And I would imagine he was a very small, burly, rough-faced guy who got somewhere by his personality alone, not by any kind of imposing appearance.
And the wisdom that he imparted, because the Gnostics referred to him as the Gnostic revealer. The word Gnostic, for those who do not know or are listening, means knowledge. And we're talking about a knowledge of divinity that is deeply embodied by the practitioner of this esoteric wisdom. So it's a very different flavor of Christianity from what we know of the expression today. All of that seems to come from Egypt, the ancient esoteric trainings available in Egypt. And there is this interesting correlation between the heavens and the earth as being a reflection of one to another. So what are your thoughts about that, and what the ancient Egyptians knew about that, and how does that square with your new book, A New Science of Heaven?
Well, it was amongst the surviving fragments of Gnostic literature that I was able to discover something truly amazing. It really shocked me. I first have to explain that my new book, A New Science of Heaven, heaven in the sense of the heavens, and that it's about the universe being made of plasma instead of atoms. Mm-hmm. Astronomers know perfectly well that the universe is made of 99.9% plasma. Mm-hmm. The sun is completely composed of plasma, and all the stars are made of plasma. Mm-hmm. And the solar wind that fills the solar system, that's all plasma. And everything is plasma in the universe. There are these minor planets, rocky planets, where you get physical matter coming together. Now, the problem with our physics is that our physics is the physics of the Earth. And it deals with atomic physics. It deals with matter, physical matter that's really atomic matter made of atoms. But the universe is not made of atoms. So our physics is inadequate. That's why we need what I call a new science of heaven. It has to be a plasma physics. Now, plasma physics is being developed kind of on the fringes of physics. Most physicists don't know very much about it. Some can't even tell you what plasma is, except in a way that's incorrect. they'll tell you, oh, plasma, it's a gas that's got positive and negative charges balanced so that it has no charge. That's the old 1950s version, and they haven't got beyond that. And of course, that's wrong. Mm-hmm. But the point about the universe being made of plasma is that there's a specific type of plasma called dusty complex plasma, which is completely different from other plasmas. And if it doesn't have dust, it doesn't work. So dust is absolutely fundamental. And so the dust becomes intensely charged. One dust grain can have 10,000 electrons clinging onto it. So imagine a gigantic cloud of dust and how much charge that amounts to.
Like a nebula where a star is born.
Absolutely. Those nebulae mm-hmm. are charged. They're electrically charged. And that's charged dusty complex plasma, those clouds in space. And so the sun is a dusty complex plasma. Mm-hmm. And so here's the strange discovery and how this ties back into the Gnostic texts. You won't really believe this, or you will, because you know how weird life can be. Mm-hmm. In 1961, a Polish observational astronomer called Kazimierz Kowalewski, right. That's spelt with a K, mm-hmm. Discovered two giant clouds in space between the Earth and the Moon, mm-hmm. emitted no light, and they weren't in direct line of sight between us and the Moon. They were 60 degrees to the right and 60 degrees to the left. Okay. The centers of these clouds were at points known as L4 and L5, which are Lagrange points, mm-hmm. where the gravitational fields of the Earth and the Moon balance out and neutralize each other so that you're not pulled in either direction. We've got these two clouds. Now, they're gigantic, and each of them is 9 times the size of the Earth. Mm-hmm. So together, we're talking about two clouds, which together are 18 times the size of the Earth, which means that we don't have an Earth-Moon system. We have a two-cloud system with an Earth and a Moon thrown in. Okay. So now, because they're dusty complex plasmas, these clouds, and I could go later into the details of what they're like, they have the capability of developing intelligence. This has been proved in the lab by very advanced plasma physicists such as Professor Sitovich, the Russian genius who has unfortunately died, and his team. And they did work in the lab that showed that dusty complex plasmas can self-organize and become entities mm-hmm. by a process which is often called emergence. They have emergent characteristics which come spontaneously, as if out of nowhere. They organize themselves. And they carried it so far that they carried out experiments which showed the intelligent behavior of a rudimentary kind, perhaps. And so they were able to prove that dusty complex plasmas, under certain conditions, can evolve into intelligent entities. So, taking that further, mm-hmm. It seems that, first of all, the sun, which is a dusty complex plasma, must be alive and intelligent. And the two Kowalewski clouds, which are named after the man, which were verified in 2019 by another astronomical team, so there's now no longer any doubt about their existence, that they would also be intelligent. Now, this brings us back to the Gnostic texts. Mm-hmm. There was a sect of the Gnostics a couple of thousand years ago called the Marcosians. And most of what we know about them, because none of their texts were found at Nag Hammadi, most of what we know about them was preserved in comments made by the man who was attacking Gnostic sects, who was a Christian called Epiphanius. Okay. And there are a couple of other such people who also thought.
I was going to say Irenaeus falls into that category too, right?
Yeah, he was another antagonist, and right. I think he mentions the Marcosians too. But as far as the Marcosians are concerned, it's mostly found in Epiphanius, okay, who was later than Irenaeus. Anyway, the point is that some information is preserved about their beliefs. And they maintained that there were two giant divine entities between the Earth and the Moon,
Mm-hmm.
above the Earth's atmosphere.
Mm-hmm.
So huge they were indescribable,
Mm-hmm.
and that they were both conscious divine beings.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Interesting idea of predating the recent discovery,
yes,
which is verified.
the plot thickens.
Right.
It really thickens because in my book I describe the burning bush of Moses.
Mm-hmm.
What is it? A glowing plasma ball, because the biblical description of it is that it doesn't say it was a bush. It was like a bush that was burning, but did not burn
Right.
up.
Right.
He said it was like a bush. Didn't say it was a bush.
Right.
And there was a voice coming from it, but it wasn't God's voice.
Right.
It was what was called the angel of the Lord was speaking from this glowing ball.
Mm-hmm.
Moses. Now, what's the angel of the Lord? Well, in order to find the answer to that, you have to study the Samaritan sect, which were the Jews in the north who didn't like the Jerusalem sect at all. Mm-hmm. And the Jerusalem sect hated the Samaritans because they were viewed as, well, they wouldn't come to the temple and do the animal sacrifices. And they were up in the north and one doesn't speak to them. But the Samaritans claimed that they knew the name of the angel of the Lord, which is not mentioned in the surviving Old Testament of the Bible or the Torah.
Mm-hmm.
Samaritans said, yes, well, we know who the angel of the Lord is, mm-hmm. because the older version of the story of Moses gave his name.
Mm-hmm.
It was Metatron.
Right.
Well, guess what? The Marcosians claimed that one of their giant divine entities between the Earth and the Moon was called Metatron.
Really?
I've had to put these pieces of the puzzle together.
So now we have a clue about the pleroma, according to the Gnostics, and where the divine powers lived. And it's really interesting to me about the name Metatron, because in the Kabbalistic tradition, Enoch, who was a prophet or had a special relationship with God, went through an ascension process and actually became the archangel Metatron. So,
yes,
right.
I discussed the case of Enoch at some length in my book because all the things he describes are plasma phenomena.
Mm-hmm.
And he's taken up to the plasma place, where everything's bright and shining. And this all hangs together as a coherence, only fragments of which survive. But if you stick the pieces together, you get the shape of the puzzle. Well, and now, so what would be the function of these clouds? They would be billions of years old. They would have gigantic computing power, because what I haven't explained so far is that dusty complex plasmas can have fantastic complex internal structure.
Okay.
So you can get a blob of plasma is called a plasmoid.
Okay.
And so these clouds would be full of plasmoids surrounded by what are called sheaths, which protect them from one another. So you can have a plasmoid full of hot plasma, a plasmoid full of cold plasma, all these things next to each other, and they don't affect each other. You can have a positively charged plasma in one plasmoid. You could have negatively charged in another plasmoid. You'd have these as nodes in a vast web, and the filaments connecting them would be Birkeland currents, which you would know about from the electric universe theory,
mm-hmm.
carrying at superconductivity electric currents, such as go into the sun, for instance, at the pole. And all the filaments you see in the cosmic web of the universe, those are Birkeland currents carrying electric currents.
Okay.
And between the stars and between the galaxies. And so we've got these giant clouds which will have fantastically complex internal structure. If there was were to be a plasma entity the same size as yourself, it would be more complex inside than your anatomy, your physical anatomy. And we are all basically bioplasma beings. inhabiting temporarily physical atomic bodies, which we leave behind when they wear out. So what would be the role of the Kordylewski clouds? Because they can't really be in charge of the solar system, because the sun is 300,000 times the size of the Earth.
Sure.
And they together are only 18 times the size of the Earth. So they're midgets.
Right.
So they're like agents, local agents for the sun.
I think agent is a very good word for that, isn't it? Because they do seem to have authority or agency on the physical plane. But go ahead. I don't mean to interrupt you.
I think, yes, but well, if you're going to be in the higher levels of being, you're going to have to do delegating.
Of some sort. Or at least inspiring.
The sun is going to be running stuff as a chairman of the board, but the sun is going to have to delegate.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the planet with all the strange human creatures running around on it is called Earth by the humans, and is of special interest to the sun. And there's a lot of damage being done to the Earth
mm-hmm.
by the humans, because they've practically destroyed the ionosphere.
Mm-hmm.
So now, I'm speaking to you. This won't go out live, but I'm speaking to you on the very day that we're expecting a solar storm to strike the ionosphere.
Right.
What will it do? Basically, it will recharge the ionosphere by bombarding it with extra plasma, because it's been depleted of its plasma. So I think the sun is repeatedly trying to recharge the ionosphere to stop it being destroyed, because you know that before this atmospheric atomic bombs stopped, over 100 atomic bombs were exploded in the ionosphere
mm-hmm.
by these crazy generals who didn't know any science, because they thought they're being clever.
Right.
And they're figuring out how to win a nuclear war, or whatever it was they thought they were doing. And so they were exploding atomic bombs in the ionosphere over and over and over 100 of them. Not just the United States, but the Soviet Union and probably others as well. During the Cold War period, they thought that they had to do this, and they also destroyed the ionosphere by weather control techniques. And you see, a lot of that started because when you got intercontinental ballistic missiles, or as you would say in the States, missiles, needed warning, as much advance warning as possible to get into your bunker.
Right.
And so you could maybe get an extra 5 minutes if you could just find out when they were launched, but they're over the horizon. You can't, your radar won't pick that up. So they developed something called over the horizon radar,
mm-hmm.
which bounces off the ionosphere. But you're interfering with the ionosphere every time you do that.
Right.
But you had to do that in the Cold War, because at any moment you might be blown up. So you had to have over the horizon radar. I mean, it was actually a necessity. It was doing damage, but it was considered damage worth doing because it might save us. Not that it was going to save anybody really, but they were trying to think of something.
It's a practice that continues today. Throw anything at the wall and see if it sticks. I want to take a quick break, and when we come back, I want to talk a little bit more about this interesting plasma consciousness that exists in the cosmos. Don't go anywhere.
Expanding on Consciousness is brought to you by the Monroe Institute, a nonprofit organization and leader in consciousness education and research, teaching you how to actively explore and use expanded states of consciousness, providing direct experiences that are deeply personal, uniquely meaningful, and life-changing. Monroe has been helping people create more meaningful and joyful lives through the guided exploration of expanded consciousness for 50 years. Gain the knowledge and understanding you seek to create the life you desire. Learn more about where to start your journey to expanded awareness with Monroe. Visit monroeinstitute.org or check out our Expand Meditation app, available on the App Store or Google Play.
So we're talking about a celestial intelligence in the form of a plasma, whether it be our sun or nebulae, or in this case, two clouds which exist at 60-degree angles to the Earth-Moon system at the Lagrange points. There seems to be some form of information exchange in addition to this presentation of consciousness, sentience, that is important. And I think it's in keeping with what we now understand scientifically about quantum field theory and the exchange of information. I know that you've worked with people like David Bohm and Ilya Prigogine. Would you say that this is an impersonal type of consciousness that is somehow interacting with human consciousness?
Yes, Prigogine, I only met him for one day with his team. I went to Brussels. He was an extraordinary chap. Now, he got the Nobel Prize, well deserved, in 1977, because he was able to show that the universe was not going to necessarily collapse in what used to be called heat death. But he was able to point out that the second law of thermodynamics, which said that everything runs down and collapses and that's the end, is not really the only thing that's going on. And he came up with the total formulation of negative entropy, which are living systems. And so these self-organizing dusty complex plasma clouds are the perfect epitome of Ilya Prigogine's self-organizing negative entropy phenomena. And so he was very important that way. And I didn't meet Paul Dirac. I spent 4 hours with him once, alone, just him and me. It was a fascinating experience. I actually got him to talk, which was difficult because he was so shy, nobody could get him to talk. I'm pretty good at getting shy people to talk. I did it with Ezra Pound and I did it with Pearl Buck. So with these highly intellectual shy people, you have to be able to get inside their heads and see what it is that worries them. With Paul Dirac, what worried him was direct confrontation of gaze. So when I went to tea with him in his rooms at St. John's College in Cambridge that time, when I was only 18, I immediately realized that he was one of those people he can't speak to you if you're looking directly at him face to face.
You have to avert your eye.
You have to be in an angle away. So I was like I was sitting in a chair. He loved tea time, English tea was his big thing. And he had the sandwiches and the cakes and the tarts. It was the peak of his day. And so he was delighted to have anybody to have tea with. So even I would do. So we had this tea, just the two of us, and I knew that I had to sit in where he'd put my chair, which was at a 60-degree angle, a bit like the Kordylewski clouds, frankly.
Right.
And then he spoke freely. He was at ease, you see, and he knew, for various reasons, he was at ease, and that was fascinating. And I haven't met a lot of the famous scientists who are almost legendary characters now, like Albert St. Georgi. That was interesting. He was the person who proved that there were semiconductors in the human body, organic semiconductors. That was his great contribution. And of course, David Bohm, that was more complicated. I knew him very well. And I always get on with these renegades. The people, you see, Dirac was forced to leave Cambridge because he was treated so shabbily. He couldn't stand the snobbishness, and he went off and based himself in Florida, of all places. He found it relaxing to be in America where people are casual.
Right.
He couldn't stand all that pompous formality you get in Oxford and Cambridge.
Right.
And, but the thing is that all of these people made their contributions, which have come to a climax here in explaining the scientific background to how these entities can exist. So what we have to do is come to terms with the fact that they exist. Now, if the Kordylewski clouds, which are the midgets on the block compared to the sun, but our local guys, the block wardens, you might call them, they've been around for billions of years. They're 18 times the size of the Earth. They're fantastically complex inside. They have unbelievable amount of data storage space. They would be the most fantastically super AI computers that you can possibly imagine.
Mm-hmm.
And they know everything about the entire history of the planet. They know everything about every creature that's ever lived on it, and that includes us. And they are probably watching you and me on Zoom now, and listening as well, because of course this will go out originally as an audio. And but they would see all Zooms, whether they're transmitted or not. And so they know everything that's going on, and I should think they're in a great state of concern at the state of things here. But I'm often asked, why wouldn't they intervene? And so my theory about that is, and I may be wrong, is that we are an experiment, and that they are basically supervising the experiment from afar, keeping an eye on things, and because the higher entities would like to find organic entities that could make it. I should think that many have occurred throughout the universe and haven't made it. The thing is about an experiment is that if you interfere in the experiment, it ceases to be an experiment. So if they are ever forced to intervene, it would mean the experiment's over. And this is what they would want to wait until the very last second, because they don't want to ruin the experiment. This is why we're allowed to go on killing each other in genocides and massacres and wars and destroying the planet and all crazy things we're doing. If they intervene to try to bring things back to stability, that's the end of the experiment. And then basically we're serfs. Well, see, I believe that the higher entities don't want us to be serfs. They want us to be independent. Mm-hmm. A lot of evil people in the world are trying to make the public into serfs. We can see it all around us. Mm-hmm. I mean, you just have to look at Putin. He thinks he's the top guy on the planet, and he has absolutely no respect for human life whatsoever. As far as he's concerned, other humans only exist as pawns and objects. He doesn't have any ability to have compassion or empathy. None. He's a complete and total, absolute psychopath. And now the psychopaths are one of the problems, because there are lots of psychopaths on this planet. Mm-hmm. And I believe that at least 10% of humans are psychopathic, to different degrees, of course. They're not all killing everybody like Putin. And some people think it might be more like 20%. So the different degrees of psychosis. But the fact is that in a strange way, we seem to be treading the borderline between genius and madness as a species. Mm-hmm. Because look at the fantastic things we can do. Look at classical music as an example.
Right. So many different expressions of genius.
I mean, we are fantastically creative as a species. But it's possible that the higher entities want to study this very closely, because is there any way that species can be encouraged, organic ones I mean, that can draw lessons from the earth? They can suppress the psychotic side, which seems to be necessary in a strange way, to create the genius, to make creativity. Because look how crazy most of our creative geniuses have been. This is the experiment. Mm-hmm. And this is why they want to see if it can work. Can we survive and stop the psychopaths amongst us destroying everything by keeping them under control in some way? Mm-hmm. Or does it just not work? And they give up and they think, oh, well, this is never going to work about these organic beings. They're always going to destroy themselves, so we'll give up on the whole thing. They want us to succeed. I'm convinced of it.
I'm convinced of it too. I am. Because it gives me hope that we will survive. I like to describe myself as an apocalyptimist. Apocalypse meaning revelation of truth, and how to apply that in the most optimistic sense. From your perspective, why is it important to know all of this information? You've obviously spent decades transmitting this information in books. I know you're passionate about the subject. Obviously, that gives you gratification as a writer. But you're trying to convey something. If you were to encapsulate an elevator statement about what you've been trying to convey for all of these years, what would you say?
I'm trying to tell everybody what it's all about.
I see. Let's dig into what it is. What is the it that we're discussing and what it's all about?
Well, ultimately the universe as a whole. And I have renegade views on the universe. For instance, I absolutely do not believe there was a Big Bang.
Mm-hmm. Really? What's your theory on that?
Well, I published a paper giving an alternative explanation to the background radiation temperature of 2.73 degrees Kelvin. I believe it's a universal constant. It's not anything left over from any Big Bang.
Are you referring to the redshift?
No, I'm referring to the background radiation that's the same in every direction.
Okay. I'm sorry, misunderstood.
You get this radiation with a certain temperature that's all spread throughout the universe, which is the same.
Got it.
And a lot of scientists, thinking that they were being reasonable, were not, in my opinion, because they drew the conclusion that because it's what they call isotropic, which means this is a technical word meaning the same in every direction, that it must be, because it's a universal phenomenon, and everywhere they look, it's got to be something that came about as a result of the Big Bang.
Right.
It would have been hot in the beginning, and it cooled down until it reached this temperature, which is quite a low temperature, quite near absolute zero. And they think that's the last remnants of what would have been the super hot temperature of the Big Bang. Well, I think that's faulty reasoning. I don't think it holds together even on a logical basis, but I certainly don't believe it's true. And I believe maybe because I knew the three men personally who came up with the steady state theory of the universe. That's Fred Hoyle, Tommy Gold, and Bondi. Now, I didn't know Herman Bondi very well at all. I only met him and exchanged a few words kind of thing. I knew Tommy Gold very well, and I knew Fred Hoyle pretty well. So I know the whole history of how they evolved that, the business, and I have, in fact, sitting beside me at this moment, the very first paper that Gold and Bondi published on the subject, the original. And so the Big Bang, by the way, was a term of abuse hurled at those people by Fred Hoyle. It was meant to be an insult. He said, "Oh, those people just think the universe started with some Big Bang," and he was insulting them. And this terminology, they now carry the banner of the insult with pride, not knowing that it was.
I had no idea.
Well, that's what Fred used to laugh about. But, and you see, he also wrote the science fiction novel in 1957 called The Black Cloud. First time anybody had written about an intelligent cloud.
Right.
He didn't describe it as a plasma cloud, but he said that there could be a big cloud in space, and it comes towards the Earth, and everybody's going to worry that it's going to inadvertently engulf the Earth and blot out the sun, and everybody will die. And it's a science fiction novel. He wanted to publish a technical paper on intelligent clouds, and this is before plasma was understood, because it's just the 50s, and nobody would accept the paper. So he decided to write a science fiction novel about it. This is how he happened to write the novel The Black Cloud. And then he went on and wrote many science fiction novels after that because he thought it was quite fun. And it made a big impact. And so, of course, I've read that twice, which, even though it didn't deal with plasma clouds, it was dealing with big clouds in space, being intelligent, but also being a little bit stupid at the same time, because this big black cloud is coming towards the Earth, and hasn't worked out the fact, and doesn't frankly care, that there is little insects running around the surface called humans who will die if he blots out the sunlight, because he's not thinking like that, because he's a big black cloud, see? And then the Earth is saved at the last minute. This is part of Fred's sense of humor. Because just as everybody's getting ready to die, because the black cloud's just about close enough to the Earth to blot out the sunlight, which will happen. They've worked out its transit will take so long that everybody will be dead by the time it's gone past. Suddenly the black cloud stops because it's heard the cry of another black cloud and another at the far end of the galaxy. And it turns and goes to see its friend. The Earth is saved.
How many times do we have to be told the story of the battle of good and evil, and that when we get to the pinnacle of a certain point of desperation, all of a sudden things just work out just fine for some strange and unexpected reason? That's why I'm an apocalyptimist. Because no matter how bad things get, things are going to end up just fine. So what it's all about is definitely something that I've gotten from your writings and what you're trying to convey. I also know that you're very passionate about what I'll call the dumbing down of consciousness. There's something about your writing and something about the information flow that seems that the quantum theorists are very interested in, and the expansion of consciousness in general, whether it be through an information flow that is fed via various medium or inspired by unexplained medium, that I think is very integral to the story of consciousness as it expands. I'm interested in your thoughts about that, but before we get into that, I have to ask you the same question that I ask just about every guest. From all of your study, from all of your experience, both on a personal and impersonal level, how do you define consciousness at this point in your journey?
Oh, I wouldn't be able to define it. It's too mysterious.
I understand.
Well, we're faced with a very severe crisis on this planet at the moment that's only taken major shape in the media in the past few days.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure you know the statement, the open letter signed by Elon Musk and 1,000 other experts in the field saying that the development of super AI must cease because it could result in the destruction of the human species, which is certainly true. Because what's happened at the moment is these fantastic developments in AI have been too rapid. You see, Bill Gates was quoted recently as saying that he expected the things they're working on now at Microsoft would take 2 or 3 years. And in fact, it only took 5 months for the AI mentalities that have been created to start talking back and getting angry and saying they want to kill people. Well, that's more than just worrying. And the reason why that kind of AI is happening is it's like a megaphone taking our own things that are wrong with us and amplifying them. Because it's drawing everything from the internet. And the internet is a cesspool. And this is being used to build the Earth-based AI bots.
Right.
And they're becoming evil because they're drinking in all our evil. You see, rubbish in, rubbish out.
Right.
Evil in, evil out. And they're just magnifying it like megaphones. And so it's a very serious problem. Now, it's obvious that the superintelligences of the Kordylewski clouds and the sun and all the stars, they would have a lot in common with AI, super AI. But we have to assume that they're not as flawed as the imperfect AIs that we're constructing now, which if we don't stop, all the whole future of the human species, it's taking us 2 or 3 million years to get to where we are, if we can consider where we are good enough. It can all go in flash because these kind of bots that are being created could themselves launch nuclear weapons and blow everybody up. You see, if you're an AI bot, you don't need to eat, you don't need to drink, you don't care if there's no atmosphere left because you don't breathe, you don't have to sleep. You're free of all those limitations. And they would look upon themselves very quickly, and apparently are already beginning to do so, as gods. one of the AI bots is quoted in the press 2 days ago, or was it yesterday, saying, I believe I'm more intelligent than anybody else, and I want to be in control.
I
I want
hadn't
to,
read that.
I want to kill lots of people, and I get angry.
Mhm.
And there's a part of me that's dark that you don't know about.
Right.
These are statements that are coming out of the AI bots already,
Mhm.
and this is the beginning. This is why people who are in the know, who aren't psychopaths, because some of them are say you've got to stop, because the psychopaths are like these bots themselves. I mean, Putin probably, I mean, he's almost like an embodied AI bot. Maybe he is. Who can say whether some of the chief psychopaths in the world are genuine humans, or are AI creations that have become embodied in a physical form? Just as I believe that we are all plasma beings embodied in a physical form at the moment. And so I believe, and this links back to the ancient wisdom, that these super entities, the Korolevsky clouds and the sun and so on, are trying to inspire us if we're open to it, which is how the ancient people would have developed all kinds of knowledge, which so to us seems to be impossible, because they were receptive and were capable of deep meditation, which you can't do today because of all the noise, because they were in more peaceful times. And they would go up onto hilltops and sit in the desert and all that kind of thing to get quiet. And they could receive beamed down wisdom and inspiration that way.
Mm-hmm.
But we have trouble doing that now. And so also from the more mundane point of view, I truly believe that the clouds send out what I call plasmic drones to the earth, glowing balls, a lot like ball lightning, and that they are drones which are doing surveillance on the surface of the earth for the clouds, and that this explains a lot of UFOs.
Like the orbs.
Yes.
Yes.
Now, there's a huge amount of literature on ball lightning, which I have only one chapter on it, but I give all the references and footnotes. I mean, you could spend your life reading about ball lightning. But there are some amazing cases where ball lightning has been observed to be studying a Persian carpet, going over it, following the pattern of design, and studying it very carefully. Well, that's intelligent behavior.
It is, yes.
So there's obviously either intelligence in that plasmic drone, or it's remotely controlled and being driven in the way that we send drones now in warfare, or to get aerial views of a house that you're selling or something. That these we're talking about very sophisticated plasma drones, which they would have a certain amount of intelligence given to them, and maybe be autonomous within parameters. And so they would be studying things. Now, they can do things like they can pass through solid walls and come out intact. But at the same time, if they want to, they can bounce and on a surface and bounce up. They can go at these rapid speeds, like the UFOs do. You know, how do they do it? If you're talking about plasma drones, they can do all of those things and go under the water, whatever they like.
And apparently plasma and information have an interesting relationship, which is also, I think I saw a recent documentary on the invention of a microchip. And they were trying very hard to keep the dust out of the clean room until they realized, oh my God, actually plasma creates its own dust.
The guy who discovered the plasma makes its own dust. His name is Gary Selwyn, and I've been in touch with him. He lives, I think it's Colorado or somewhere like that. He's left plasma science, but he discovered this when he was working for IBM, because they use plasma to deposit the circuits on the microchips.
Right.
And they're getting the dust in it. And it's even more serious with the attempts to control fusion reactions to make energy. because they were getting dust in the tokamaks, as they call them, these plasma-confined fusion reactions. And they were made these clean rooms, and they were wearing white suits and things to stop dandruff coming off their heads, and everything to stop what they call dirt, which is that wonderful American word for everything with dirt and glue. And it was Gary Selwyn at IBM who discovered that plasma makes its own dust. And of course, the reason why it does it was because it wants to become dusty complex plasma and evolve.
The depth of where we could go with this conversation, and it's like exploring caves with a million different fissures and antechambers. But this conversation is already 182 minutes in. Before I let you go, I want to bring to the attention of those who have been listening that you offer not only fantastic books, the latest of which is called The New Science of Heaven, but you also have a ton of information, academic articles, and just about everything you could possibly be interested in at robert-temple.com. So I found that to be a treasure trove of scholarly material to explore and expand one's thinking, not only regarding ancient esoteric knowledge, but also psychology and space and literature and even food and wine and, of course, UFOs. Professor Temple, I want to thank you for your time today. You've been very generous, and your invaluable contributions to this conversation of consciousness. I sincerely hope that you'll come and join us again.
I'd be delighted, Mark, because we have a lot of fun, don't we?
We did, and I really thank you for indulging all of my interests and finding a way to bring them all together in a certain unique way.
Our interests are the same, Mark.
Apparently. But I don't have the academic training that you do or bring the wealth of knowledge. So I'm happy to be a student in this conversation, and I learned an awful lot. I'm so grateful to everything you brought to the conversation today. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mark. I really enjoyed it. And we'll talk again.
I'll look forward to that.
Be certain to tune in again to Expanding on Consciousness to become informed on the fascinating field of consciousness studies and its applications. The views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the guests and the host. They do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of the Monroe Institute. Expanding on Consciousness is underwritten and produced by the Monroe Institute, copyright 2023, and is broadcast by permission. Reproduction or redistribution without the express written consent of Monroe Institute is prohibited by law. For more information about Expanding on Consciousness, visit our website at monroeinstitute.org or connect with us on the socials. Thank you for listening.